In our headlines on this Tuesday, November 4th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung speaks of tripling next year's government spending on AI-related projects, stressing that the transition to artificial intelligence is essential, not optional. Also, here in Seoul, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth hold their annual talks on this Tuesday and reaffirm their security commitment. Meanwhile, consumer prices here rise faster than forecast in October, hitting 2.4% on year, driven by higher prices of agricultural and fishery products. We start with comments by President Lee Jae-myung calling for tripling spending on AI infrastructure expansion and technology. The call came during an address at the National Assembly about his administration's budget for next year. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The focus of the 2026 budget proposal was on seeking new growth engines, with President Lee Jae-myung calling it the very first budget to open up the era of AI.
국제 무역 통상 질서의 재편과 인공지능 대전환의 파도 앞에서 국가 생존을 모색해야 할 절체절명의 위기에 처해 있습니다. 이제는 인공지능 시대의 고속도로를 구축해서 도약과 성장의 새로운 미래를 열어야 합니다.
The government has projected a record high of 728 trillion won, or over $508 billion for next year's budget, up 8% from this year. Nearly $7 billion has been earmarked for AI-related projects, 3 times higher than this year's spending, with a focus on physical AI and use of the technology in robots and automobiles. Next year's defense spending will be expanded by more than 8%, worth over $46 billion, with more use of AI by the defense forces, as the commander-in-chief called for self-reliant defense.
전 세계 5위의 군사력으로 평가받는 우리 대한민국이 국방을 외부에 의존한다는 것은 우리 국민의 자존심 문제 아니겠습니까?
Other areas of focus were on the R&D budget, which will be a record high, as well as the so-called National Growth Fund, NK Culture. He also vowed to secure a social safety net and help small business owners through local consumption coupons. And looking back on last week's diplomatic super week, the president said uncertainties over the economy have been eased by reaching a trade deal with the U.S. As the president called for across-the-aisle collaboration, speaking before a 2/3 full Congress, following a boycott by the main opposition People Power Party over an arrest warrant against its party member.
좀 허전하군요.
The mood was starkly contrasting as the ruling Democratic Party lawmakers responded to the president with rounds of applause. The legal deadline for the parliamentary budget review is set for December 2nd. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
As mentioned in that report, the main opposition People Power Party chose to opt out of the president's budget speech at the parliament in protest of what the party calls political oppression. Our National Assembly correspondent Moon Hae-ryun has details.
South Korea's main opposition, People Power Party, boycotted President Lee Jae-myung's policy speech at the National Assembly on Tuesday, protesting what it calls political oppression by the government. The president's address, which urged lawmakers to swiftly pass next year's budget, went ahead without the conservative bloc, leaving what some described as a half-empty chamber. Wearing black masks and ribbons reading Mourning for Liberal Democracy, opposition lawmakers staged a silent protest on the steps of the main hall, condemning the recent arrest warrant request for former floor leader Chu Kyung-ho in relation to the failed martial law order last December. Inside the chamber, the president began his remarks by acknowledging the empty seats, but expressed hope that all parties ultimately share the same goal, serving the people. The Speaker of the National Assembly, Woo Won-sik, opened the session by welcoming the president's visit, noting that while political discord remains, cooperation is vital.
Since this is a very crucial time, I believe it's especially important for the National Assembly and the government to work closely together and take a step forward in cooperation.
He praised the administration's diplomatic gains at the recent APEC leaders meeting, saying they restored market confidence and national pride. Democratic Party lawmakers applauded repeatedly throughout the president's 22-minute speech, particularly as he highlighted the government's efforts to stabilize the economy and improve citizens' livelihoods. Meanwhile, the Special Committee on Budget and Accounts is set to begin its review of the 2026 spending plan this week, starting with a public hearing on Wednesday, followed by policy questioning sessions and detailed ministry-by-ministry deliberations through mid-November. A final vote is scheduled before the legal deadline of December 2nd, though sharp partisan divisions could delay passage. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And President Lee Jae-myung says his sideline summits last week on the margins of the multilateral APEC meeting were a success, but simply a start.
자국의 이익을 지키려는 이 총성 없는 전쟁은 계속될 것으로 보여집니다. 그리고 국제사회 질서의 불확실성 등도 단기간에 해소되지 않을 겁니다. 그럴수록 우리는 담대한 용기, 치밀한 준비, 하나된 힘을 바탕으로 국익을 지키고 국력을 키워서
At Tuesday's cabinet meeting, the president called on relevant ministries to follow through with commitments made during the bilateral exchanges and called for bipartisan support to carry them out. He further called on his cabinet to make note of the individuals who played a part in ensuring diplomatic gains. On the security front, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth held their annual talks here in Seoul earlier on this Tuesday. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has the latest.
The South Korean and U.S. defense chiefs reaffirmed the steadfastness of the ROK-U.S. alliance during their annual security talks, the 57th Security Consultative Meeting on Tuesday. A joint communique was not released, waiting for a joint fact sheet for the two countries to come out first. Still, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did share some parts of the discussion they had during the meeting.
We've had many meetings and discussions to find ways to strengthen defense cooperation based on mutual trust and teamwork, so we can respond to the rapidly changing security situation and build a future-oriented and friendly alliance.
While underlining the need to boost defense ties grounded in realism, the U.S. defense chief again stated that Trump wants allies to be strong. Noting that South Korea is a model ally, Hegseth said he was encouraged by South Korea's commitment to increase defense spending and make greater investments in ROK military capabilities. To modernize the alliance and boost ties, the two allies agreed on some practical steps, including having U.S. warships be repaired in South Korea, with more to come.
Maintaining warships in theater will also ensure our most lethal capabilities remain ready to respond to any crisis. Soon, we also plan to expand our cooperation to maintaining ground equipment in Korea as well.
When it comes to nuclear-powered submarines, the Pentagon is going to work closely with other departments to fulfill President Trump's commitment, Hegseth added. Asked to whether the U.S. forces Korea could be used against China in the Taiwan Strait, he underlined the importance of flexibility, but said the USFK is oriented to protect South Korea from the north.
There's no doubt, flexibility for regional contingencies is something we would take a look at, but we are focused on standing by our allies here and ensuring the threat of the DPRK is not a threat to the Republic of Korea, and certainly continue to extend nuclear deterrence as we have before.
The comment resonates with the two defense chiefs' earlier visit to the joint security area within the demilitarized zone on Monday for the first time in 8 years. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea has resorted to visible displays that would be of force in recent days to coincide with diplomatic events here in South Korea. Now, this is according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff on this Tuesday. The regime fired about 10 rounds from its multiple rocket launchers into waters of the northern part of the West Sea, both this past Saturday and Monday afternoons. The first firings came about half an hour before the Seoul-Beijing summit, while the latter took place about half an hour before U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth arrived near the DMZ to meet Defense Minister An Gyu-baek. The U.S. is moving to slap new sanctions on 7 ships suspected of selling North Korean coal to China. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
The United States has moved to impose new sanctions on 7 ships accused of violating United Nations Security Council resolutions by smuggling North Korean coal and iron ore. According to Reuters, Washington will soon ask the UN North Korea Sanctions Committee to blacklist the vessels, which allegedly transported the banned minerals to China and other destinations. A senior U.S. official said North Korea earns between $200 and $400 million annually through such illegal exports, which are used to fund its nuclear and missile programs. The official also revealed that in May and June, a North Korean vessel named Shinpyeong 6 transferred coal to a Sierra Leone flagged ship called Fly Free on the high seas, later offloading at China's Weifang port. However, to enact the sanctions, all UN Security Council members must agree unanimously. But with China and Russia both having close diplomatic ties to Pyongyang and holding veto powers, the proposal faces steep obstacles. If adopted, the 7 ships could be barred from entering ports worldwide, and related shipping firms or individuals could face asset freezes and travel bans. Analysts say the move underscores Washington's effort to tighten financial pressure on the Kim Jong-un regime amid renewed concerns over North Korea's weapons development and deepening ties with Moscow and Beijing. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Unification Ministry here has undergone major restructuring aimed at reviving dialogue with North Korea. The ministry has reinstated the Inter-Korean Dialogue Headquarters, which was abolished under the previous Yoon Suk-yeol administration, along with a Bureau for Peace and Exchange and a team that oversees issues related to the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Also, an office that focused on North Korean human rights was dissolved and replaced by a new Bureau for Socio-Cultural Cooperation. A new unit for public dialogue on unification policy has also been launched. North Korea's former ceremonial head of state Kim Young-nam has died. According to the regime state media, the 97-year-old died from multiple organ failure. He was one of Pyongyang's most prominent diplomats, serving under 3 generations of leadership. He was best known internationally for leading North Korea's delegation to the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics here in South Korea, where he met then-President Moon Jae-in. North Korea's Kim Jong-un was at the funeral hall in Pyongyang earlier on this Tuesday morning to pay tribute. Consumer prices here in South Korea rose faster than forecast in October to hit 2.4% on year. Our Eun-jin has more.
South Korea's consumer prices grew at the fastest pace in 15 months in October. According to data released by the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Tuesday, South Korea's consumer prices last month increased 2.4% from a year earlier. This marks the largest on-year increase since July 2024, when they increased by 2.6%. Looking at 2025, on-year consumer price increases have been higher than the Bank of Korea's target of 2% from January to April, then slowed slightly in May to 1.9% before going back above the 2% mark for June and July. On-year consumer price increases briefly slowed to 1.7% in August, but then climbed over 2% again in September, before hitting a new high for the year in October. The ministry said that October's figures were primarily due to a sharp increase in prices for agricultural and fishery products, which jumped 3.1%, adding 0.25 percentage points to the overall figure. Pork in particular rose 6.1%, and mackerel rose 11%. Processed food and petroleum products also added upward pressure on prices, rising 3.5% and 4.8% respectively. Core inflation, which excludes energy prices and foods that often see short-term price fluctuations, rose 2.2% in October, which is higher than September's 2% increase. 이은진, Arirang News.
In other news, Beijing has extended its visa-free policy for dozens of countries by another year. Accordingly, South Koreans planning to travel to China for business or pleasure can do so without a visa for up to 30 days until the end of 2026. Our An Sung-jin reports.
China has extended its visa-free entry policy for South Korean nationals for another year. This allows a short-term stay of up to 30 days for tourism, business, or family visits until December 31st, 2026. The announcement was made on Monday by China's Foreign Ministry as part of a plan to make travel more convenient and strengthen international exchanges.
To facilitate cross-border travel between Chinese and foreign nationals, China has decided to extend the visa-free policy for France and several other countries until December 31st, 2026.
The extension applies to 45 countries that were already covered by the temporary visa-free policy, including South Korea, Japan, France, and others. Adding to the list, China will expand the policy to include Sweden starting from November 10th. Analysts say this decision reflects positive momentum in bilateral relations between South Korea and China following the recent summit talks between the country's leaders on the sidelines of the APEC economic leaders meeting in Gyeongju. South Korea has also been implementing its own temporary visa-free policy for Chinese group tourists since last September to encourage reciprocal tourism and improve people-to-people exchanges. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And one farm in Gyeonggi-do province is using coffee grounds to grow mushrooms, and it says yield is up while costs are down. Our Cha Yun-kyung explains.
This is a farm for oyster mushrooms in Gyeonggi-do province. It seems like a normal cultivation facility, but there's a special secret hidden in the substrate the mushrooms are growing on, used coffee grounds. By mixing the grounds with traditional substrate materials, the mushroom yield increased by an average of 8%.
The coffee grounds are rich in nutrients like lipids and crude protein. When the right conditions are provided, the results show a remarkable boost in mushroom production.
It's not just mushroom yields that have increased. Coffee grounds are more than 50% cheaper than traditional substrate materials, such as cottonseed meal and beet pulp, making them highly cost-effective. As a result, the grounds are gaining attention as a prime example of resource-circulating agriculture, reusing agri-food byproducts in farming.
We found that coffee grounds replace about 10% of beet pulp and cottonseed meal in the substrate. We will present a standardized substrate formula using coffee waste and promote its supply among farmers.
Used coffee grounds are creating a virtuous cycle of resource circulation, boosting farmers' income while also contributing to environmental protection. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Starting in Afghanistan, a 6.3 magnitude earthquake has killed at least 20 people and injured more than 640 others. The quake struck early Monday morning local time, shaking the northern part of the country and destroying hundreds of homes. Hospitals are treating dozens of people in critical condition, and rescuers say the number of casualties is still rising. Local authorities also report damage to a major historic mosque, though the structure remains standing. The Taliban government says emergency teams are working in affected areas, and the United Nations has begun delivering aid. However, rescue efforts are being slowed by blocked roads and poor communication in mountain villages. In the United States, as the government shutdown enters its second month, the Trump administration says it will provide reduced food aid to more than 42 million Americans. The decision follows a court order from federal judges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island directing the Department of Agriculture to use $5.25 billion in emergency funds to make partial payments to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as food stamps. The SNAP program, which supports low-income households, normally costs around $8 billion per month, but has been unfunded since October 1st. The reduced food stamp payments are expected to reach families later this week. In Rome, rescue teams have freed a worker trapped for nearly 12 hours after the partial collapse of a medieval tower undergoing restoration. The man was pulled from the rubble of the Torre dei Conti and taken to hospital late on Monday. The tower, built in the 13th century, first gave way late in the morning on Monday, injuring another worker before part of the structure collapsed again during the rescue. Authorities have cordoned off the area as engineers assess what caused the collapse. In Paris, fast fashion retailer Shein's first permanent store is set to open on Wednesday amid a fierce backlash. The planned store inside the prestigious 19th century Beige department store building has sparked outrage and protests from workers and ethical brands, warning it undermines France's anti-fast fashion laws and Paris's progressive image. Several French companies, including Disneyland Paris, have withdrawn partnerships, while city officials called the move a provocation. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
The southern cold has receded and the typical autumn weather for this time of year returned this afternoon. The maximum temperature in Seoul topped out at 16 degrees Celsius during the day today. Southern regions saw higher daytime temperatures at around 20 degrees. As the temperature rise sharply during the day, the daily temperature range between morning and day widens. As we go into the second half of the week, the temperature will rise even more, going above the average levels. Temperatures in Seoul will move up to 19 degrees both tomorrow and Thursday. Seoul and Gyeongju will start off at 6 degrees tomorrow morning, with Daegu at 7 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to 18 to 22 degrees across the country. Rain is expected in the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province on Friday and in the south and Jeju Island over the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon South Korea's trade deal with the U.S. following talks between their leaders last week.